Hello, welcome back. Hello friends, this is the last part of our first module, that is the requirement engineering, specification and all those things. In this video, what we are going to talk about is the modeling of requirements, how requirements can be modeled, and what are use cases and user stories. So this is the last part of first module. So what do you mean by requirements modeling? Requirements modeling depicts or picturizes or describes the requirements in an easy and understandable form. So, how we understood the requirements that will be represented in some form. That form is called a model. So, model means it is a predefined structure or a structure. Model means it's a structure. So, we are putting it what we have understood into a structure. We use a combination of text and diagrams. So it is a text plus diagram representation. So text plus diagram representation we are using for representing the models. Why we need a model? So model has definitely different set of requirements. Any model has a need to pertaining to some specific conditions. Here we have a requirement and we are representing in text and diagrammatic forms. So why we require to represent such things or requirements in such a model? First of all, to validate the software. So validation, which we have already discussed. So to validate the software requirements, that needs to be examined. So when you want to validate, you require a reference point. So this reference point is the model. Then validation from different viewpoints. So we have already discussed the different viewpoints. For example, we have 3 levels of things. So from where you see the requirement will change, or the nature of requirement will be different. So we have to examine from all the viewpoints. Then multiple viewpoints help to find omissions, errors and inconsistencies. So your program, your requirement should be complete and consistent. Basically it should be complete and consistent. So to find out, is there any errors are there, or is there any omissions are there, or if there are any kind of inconsistencies are there, if it is complete, or is there any conflicts are available, all these things we can find out from the model. It is acting as a bridge between the description of the system and the design model. So after getting the requirements, what we do is, it is the design. We are going for a design. So this part, this gap will be filled by the requirement model. Must achieve 3 primary things. So whenever you are creating a model, it should have 3 major objectives. 1, to describe what customer requires. കസ്റ്റമർക്ക് എന്താണ് വേണ്ടത് എന്ന് വളരെ സ്പെസിഫിക് ആയിട്ട് പറയണം. Then to establish a basis for creation of the design. So based on this, what we call it as SRS. We are talking about an SRS because this is the final document of your requirement engineering process. So once your requirement engineering process is over, you will get an SRS. This SRS will act as the basis for your design. So from SRS, you are going into the next stage called design. So if your SRS is not correct and it should be in a model, you cannot go for the design. Then to define a set of requirements that can be validated once the software is built. When the requirements are to be put in a different form, or sorry, defined in a set of requirements, you have to define a set of requirements. So all the requirements are to be defined in a structure so that it can be validated once the software is built. So when the software development is complete, we can go back and find out how this will help, or how this will be executed in your development. Then there are different models available. We are not going into the details of this. We are just talking about the way in which the models are acting and what are the different models. First one is the scenario based model. So then, as the name indicates, what is a scenario? A scene means a set of events. So events are combined together. Events are combined together to form a scene. This is just like a cinema. Every scene will be created scenario. Every scene will be created from different events. In film, we share different shots. Different shots creates a scene. Similarly, each event is a kind of shot. For example, when you are using an ATM, you have different events. One, insert the card. Then second, validation of the card. Then selection of operation. Based on that, user input. Likewise, you have n set of events are attached. So these events will constitute the total process of using an ATM. So using an ATM is the scenario which consisting of a set of events. So scenario based models of requirements from the point of view of the system actors. Who are all the people which is using that particular requirement? For example, in this case, in ATM case, there are three different set of users. One is the account holder or card holder. Second is the bank officials. Third is the maintenance staff. There are three different set of operators are there. We call it as actors. Three different set of actors are available. So how the actor sees the system? What are the requirements? Then what are the bank officials wants to do? What are the maintenance staff wants to do? So everything that they do are called actions. So everything that will be represented in the form of actors and actions. So we use use cases and user stories for defining the scenario based models. Then next is the data model that depicts the information of the problem, domain for the problem, information domain of the problem. For example, what kind of data we are going to use, how we are going to store the data, what should be the structure of data, etc. will be discussed in this data model. Then class oriented model. Okay, suppose we are going into an object oriented development, you have to represent everything in the form of a class. So class means it is a collection of objects. So what is an object? It's a real life entity. So whatever problem what we are going to solve is a combination of real life entities or communication between real life entities. So we have to represent all the objects. That's called attributes and its operations. Attributes and operations. So a class defines the set of attributes and the operations that can be performed on the operations. Attributes represents the characteristics of your objects. This represents the characteristics, and operations performs the changes in characteristics. Changes in characteristics means when an attribute value changes from one to another, then we call it as an operation. So the value change is called an operation. So class oriented models that represents object oriented classes, that is attribute and operations, and the manner in which these classes collaborate to achieve the system requirements, that is when how the values will be changing. Then next is the flow oriented model. The next model is the flow oriented model that represent the functional elements of the system and how they transform data to move through the system. For example, we say modular design. In the older procedure design, modular design represents the flow oriented model. We can say DFD is a flow oriented model. For example, it starts from the top, then it comes to the next level, then it comes to the next level. Like that, you will have a flow how the system will operate. Then the last model that we uses is the behavioral model that depicts the how a software behaves as a consequences of external events. External event means any request that the user will give is how the system will behave. That is the behavioral model. So the major models for or the type of models for requirement representations are scenario based, data based, class oriented based, then flow oriented and behavioral based. So these are the major type of models. We are not going into the details of this, just for information which has been told. Then how to record the requirements. We will how we can record the requirements. So there are so many ways we can record the requirements. That means documenting. Actually, we call it as documenting the requirements. But how we will document? We said it is we can have a process called and then SRS will be there to. We have SRS to represent our requirements. So how we will represent it in SRS? There are so many ways. You can write it in natural language format, then you can write it in procedural languages, or with the help of language support. That means higher level language support you can write, but all these things will have its own problems. That is, if you write it in a technical format, whether the other users can understand it or not, it is not possible to understand. So if you are writing it in a technical form, people cannot understand, especially the stakeholders, the business people cannot understand that. If you write it in a pure natural language, it will be difficult for the developers to develop it. So in between, what we have done is to improve the way of representation of recording the requirements. There are different methods, that is promising methods, out of which one is UML, that is called a unified modeling language. It uses class representations, then sequence diagrams, and collaboration diagram, activity diagrams, then what else, the deployment diagram, etc. This we will study in the third module. So deployment diagram, etc. will be used for representing the unified modeling language. Then next is the user stories. User story means how a user uses a particular function, why he needs it, what it is represented. All these type of representations will be given in user stories. And use cases, it is just what we have seen right now. That is, it represents in the form of actions, actors and actions. So we will have actors and actions. We represent everything in the term of actors and actions. And last one is the prototype, which we have already discussed. That is working model of a system. We will go for a working model of a system. So these are the ways by which we can represent our recordings. Then the unified so let us go one by one into detail in a very precise manner, or in a very short manner. In UML, specify how part of system will work. So this is a decomposed model. Every part will be separately explained. So your whole system will be divided into small parts, and we say, okay, this part how it works. We talk about how it works. So unified modeling allows you to specify how part of the system should work. Despite its name, UML is not a single unified language. Instead, it uses several kinds of diagrams to represent the different pieces of the system. So it is not compulsory that you have to everything should be represented in a single form. It can be multiple forms or multiple diagrams can be used. As I told earlier, that is, you can use class diagrams, you can use sequence diagrams, you can use collaboration diagrams, activity diagrams, deployment diagrams, activity, etc. The kind of things can be used. Some of this represents items such as class, other represents behavior, and as the way object interact with each other and the way data flow through the system. So look at it. Some of these things represents how the classes are organized. Some of the figures represents the behavior of the system, and some of the figures represents the object, how the object will be communicating or interacting with each other. All these things can be represented using different ways, and how the data will be flowing. All these things can be separately mentioned. Then the drawback of this is, most notably, it is complicated. This is a complicated form because every user should know what it is. What it is, then what is the representation. They should understand the representation. Then they should understand the beginning of beginning and end of your UML. Most of the people, most of the normal stakeholders cannot understand this. That is the drawback of this. UML includes two main categories of diagram that are divided into a dozen and specific types, each of its own complex set of rules. So there are two main categories of UML, each diagram, two categories of diagrams, that is, one is behavior and the other one is interaction, divided into more a dozen specific types. So that means within these two categories you have n number of types. So it is complex, having set of complex rules for individual things. Specifying complex requirements with UML is only useful if everyone understands the UML. If everyone understands UML, then you can go for the representation in UML4. Unfortunately, the customers and users don't want to learn it because they don't know it and they don't want to learn it. So in our case, this option we are discarding. Then next is the user stories. This is the latest mechanism of representing your requirement. The user story is exactly what you might think. A story explaining the system for something. You are explaining the system in a exactly what you think. നിങ്ങളൊരു കഥ എഴുതുന്നത് പോലെ ഇതിനെ എഴുതുന്നു. A short story explaining how the system will function or something will work. Many developers write stories on index cards. I will show you how it is like that. You will use different types of index cards to encourage brevity. The scope of each story should also be limited so that no story should take too long to implement. That means these requirements should be represented in small pieces. So small pieces of requirements will be represented in one user story. The story does not contain a lot of detail about things. So you will not unnecessarily lengthen this story. You will write it in very specific words, or you are very in short. You write it in very short. No, too much of detail won't be available. User stories should come with an acceptance testing procedure. So if a particular user want to use a story, if he accepts it only when this acceptance testing will, or accepting testing procedure with acceptance criteria. We call it as, we have acceptance criteria. ഈ acceptance criteria കൂടി അതോടൊപ്പം കൊടുക്കണം. ഈ acceptance ക്രൈറ്റീരിയയും കൂടെ കൊടുത്തെങ്കിൽ മാത്രമേ അതിനനുസരിച്ച് യൂസേഴ്സിന് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റത്തുള്ളൂ. If you can use it at the end of the development, decide whether the application satisfied the story or not. ഈ സ്റ്റോറി സാറ്റിസ്ഫൈഡ് ആയോ ഇല്ലയോ എന്ന് അന്നേരം മാത്രമേ മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ പറ്റത്തുള്ളൂ. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ആൻ ഇൻഫോർമൽ നാച്ചുറൽ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്ഷൻ ഓഫ് വൺ മോർ ഫീച്ചേഴ്സ് ഓഫ് ദി സോഫ്റ്റ്വെയർ സിസ്റ്റം. അപ്പോൾ ഒരു സിസ്റ്റത്തിൻ്റെ ഫോർമൽ ആൻഡ് നാച്ചുറൽ ലാംഗ്വേജ് ഡിസ്ക്രിപ്ഷൻ ആണ് ഏതെന്ന് പറയുന്നത് യൂസർ സ്റ്റോറി എന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. It's a tool used in agile software development. We have already touched the agile software development. That is, we are develop it in small pieces. Then to capture a description of a feature from an end user perspective. So it is an end user mode of representation. What end user exactly does, that will be captured. The story describes the type of the user and what they want and why it is required. So major things are the user. Who is the user? We should be able to know who is the user, what he wants to do, why he want to do. So this three things has to be very clearly defined in your user story. Story helps to create a simplified description of the requirement. So from the user story, we can very well define a well-defined requirement. The story is defined incrementally in 3 stages. So the story is writing in 3 different forms. One is the brief description of the need. That is what the conversation happened during backlog grooming and iteration planning. Okay, backlog grooming means you are fixing the requirements. Backlog എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നിങ്ങളുടെ ചെയ്യാൻ പോകുന്ന റിക്വയർമെന്റ്സ് ആണ്. അതിനെ ഗ്രൂം ചെയ്തെടുക്കുകയാണ്. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് റിഫൈനിങ്. അതിനെ റിഫൈൻ ചെയ്തെടുക്കുമ്പോൾ നിങ്ങൾ അതിൻ്റെ ഇടയിൽ നടക്കുന്ന കോൺവെർസേഷൻസ് എന്തൊക്കെയാണെന്ന് പറയണം. ദ ടെസ്റ്റ് ദാറ്റ് കൺഫേംസ് ദ സ്റ്റോറി സാറ്റിസ്ഫാക്ടറിലി. അപ്പോൾ ഈ സ്റ്റോറി അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഈ റിക്വയർമെന്റ് സാറ്റിസ്ഫാക്ടറി ആയി കംപ്ലീറ്റ് ചെയ്യാനുള്ള അക്സെപ്റ്റൻസ് ക്രൈറ്റീരിയ എന്തൊക്കെയാണ് എന്ന് കൂടി പറയണം. All these although are known as 3 cards. So it is represented in 3 C's. 3 cards alla 3 C's. One is card, a conversation and a confirmation. So these three things are required when you are representing a user story. So what are the advantages? Its story may be seemed low tech, but people are already familiar with them. So it is very easy to write. There is nothing technical, so anybody can understand. They are easy to write, easy to understand, and can cover just about any situation that can be imagined. So what you think can be represented. Think, represent in the same way. Whatever you think, represent it in the same way. Can be simple or complex depending on the situation. So if the situation is simple, you can write it as simple. If it is complex, then what we will do is we will split the complex scenario into multiple simple items, multiple simple form. So that means your problem can be solved very easily. Customers, developers, managers, and other members already know how to understand it without any new training, because reading a natural language does not require any kind of informations. But the representation gives an extra facility to the developers that to understand how the requirements will evolve. Give a lot of expressive and flexibility without a lot of extra work. Without any extra work, you will get expressiveness and flexibility. So you can express everything in a very good manner. It can easily write stories that are confusing, ambiguous, inconsistent with other stories, and it can be unverifiable. So when you are writing it, it should not be confusing, it should be clear, it should be unambiguous, and it should be consistent. That is must. And it should be verifiable. Verifiable. So that means whenever you are writing a user story, it should be very clear, it should be unambiguous, it should be consistent, and it should be verifiable. Now let us come to the way in which the story is represented. So we are already told user that a user should be there and what he should want and what he wants and why he wants. These three things has to be represented in your user story. So the stories only captures the essential elements of requirement. Who is it for? What is it for? And why is it important? If even this why is optional, it is not compulsory, because that gives you an explanation the necessity of this process or necessity of this requirement in the application. So it is written like this: as a role, okay, as an administrator, I want what? I want to approve logins, so that why? So that the users can be tracked. So the process is, as a role, I want something and why I need this. So the answers are there. Who is the user? Say who is comes under user. What is exactly what he wants to do? Why he wants to do this. So this is the way it can be represented. So we call it as role. Role means the user should be an actual human who interacts with the system. No need of explanation. Be specific as possible. വളരെ കൃത്യമായിട്ട് പറയണം, ജനറൽ ആയിട്ട് പറയരുത്. ഡെവലപ്മെന്റ് ടീം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് ഒരു യൂസർ അല്ല, നിങ്ങളുടെ സിസ്റ്റത്തിന്റെ യൂസേഴ്സിനെ കുറിച്ചാണ് പറയുന്നത്. ഇറ്റ് ഈസ് ഹു ഈസ് ഗോയിങ് ടു യൂസ് ദ സിസ്റ്റം. Then next is actions. The behavior of the system should be written as actions. So what exactly it does, that is written in an action. Usually unique for each user story, because every story represents either a full function or a set of functions. So that you have to very clearly mention. So if set of functions means it becomes complex, then we have to come into function. So it is unique in nature. The system is implemented that does not get written in the story. The system is implied and does not written in the story. You do not use the system should have like that, because there is no need for it. Use active voices are to be used, not passive used. I can be notified. Then third is the benefits. That is, this is the question is like the process is like this. This is who, this is what, and the last one is why. The benefit should be real world result that is non-functional or external to the system. So any behavior or any behavior, why you need it, its a benefit should be real world result. So when you are implement or when you are executing this particular action, what will be the result, that should be explained. Many stories may share the same benefit. Sometimes more than one story can share the same benefit. The benefit may be for other users or customers, not just for the users in the story. So you are talking about a user here. This may be not only for him but also for the other users in the system. This is an example of user story. As a customer, you see here, as a customer, I want a shopping cart feature so that I can easily purchase items. Then next is, as a manager, I want to generate a report so that I can understand which department need more resources. As a customer, I want to receive SMS when the item is arrived so that I can go pick it up right away. So this gives you the way in which a user story will be represented. So role represents the person, system, subsystem, or any entity who will be interacting with the system to be implemented to achieve a goal. The role will gain values by interacting with system. So the role is interacting with the system. Action represents the user's expectations, what the user expect from the system, and benefits represents the value behind the interaction with the system. What is the value the user is getting? It is not a rule but guideline that helps you think about a user story by considering the following. So never think of it as a rule. It is only a guideline. User story cannot be given as rules. The user story will bring value to the someone or concerned party, because when I am purchasing something from Amazon, when I am purchasing something from Amazon, I am getting a value as customer. That is, I don't have to go anywhere. The item will be purchased from the homes itself. The user story is fulfilling a user's need. For example, I am purchasing something from Amazon. I am trying to purchase something from Amazon, and I am getting the features for ordering such things, and finally I am getting a message that the system is or your order is received and your item will be arriving on today, it is in transit, etc. So we are keep updated with the information. So that is one of the another example. This is a reason to support, there is a reason to support implementing this user story. Why we want to use this story? ഈ സ്റ്റോറി എന്തിനു വേണ്ടിയാണ് നമ്മൾ എഴുതിയത് എന്ന് കൂടി ഏതിൽ പറയാൻ പറ്റും? ബെനിഫിറ്റിൽ നമുക്ക് പറയാൻ പറ്റും. See, this is the way this is the structure of a user story. Because this is a user story, you have a role over here, you have a goal, you have a benefit, you have a description, and you can have an acceptance criteria. So this is the way your user story will be represented. For example, as an admin, I want to be able to create a new product with the mandatory columns under basic information section so that the new product become available for end user transaction. See this, it is written very clearly with the different colors. See here, in the first case, this is a goal as an administrator. That means that is the rule. I want to be able to create a new product with the mandatory columns. So it is the goal. And so that the new product become available, that is the benefit. And whatever things to be described in the description, that is, add a new product, must be following fields: product name, then product category. So this is our data representation can be here. Data representation can be here, given here if required. And the last one is the acceptance criteria. That is, all user validation should work and display correct validation message as defined globally. After creating a product, it should searchable from the search page. This you can understand. I don't need to give any very big explanations. It should display the successful manage message after successfully creating a product. So product creation message is to be given. Users with product creation right will only be allowed to create and access new product. So these are the major criteria. So നമ്മളിത് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ഇത്രയും കാര്യങ്ങൾ നമ്മളുടെ സിസ്റ്റത്തിൽ വരുന്നുണ്ടോ എന്ന് നമുക്ക് ചെക്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുമല്ലോ. ടെസ്റ്റ് കേസുകൾ നമ്മൾ ജനറേറ്റ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടത് പിന്നത്തെ കേസ്. പക്ഷെ നമുക്കറിയാം എന്താണ് നമ്മളുടെ സിസ്റ്റം ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ഇന്ന കാര്യങ്ങൾ ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കണം എന്ന് നമുക്ക് വളരെ കൃത്യമായിട്ട് അറിയാൻ പറ്റും. സോ ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് കോൾഡ് ദി അക്സെപ്റ്റൻസ് ക്രൈറ്റീരിയ. സോ ദിസ് ഈസ് ദി സ്ട്രക്ചർ ഓഫ് യുവർ യൂസർ സ്റ്റോറി. നൗ ഇതാണ് കാർഡ് എന്ന് നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ, സിമ്പിൾ സ്റ്റോറി കാർഡ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞില്ലേ നേരത്തെ. നേരത്തെ ഒരു സ്റ്റോറി കാർഡ് എന്നൊരു പേര് പറഞ്ഞിരുന്നല്ലോ തൊട്ട് മുന്നേ. ആ സ്റ്റോറി കാർഡിൽ എഴുതുന്നത് ഇങ്ങനെയാണ്. ഇത് സാധാരണ നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന സ്റ്റിക്കി നോട്ട്സ് ആണ്. നമ്മളുടെ സ്റ്റിക്കി നോട്ട്സ് ആണ് ഇതിനു വേണ്ടി ഉപയോഗിക്കുക. സോ റൈറ്റ് ഇറ്റ് ഇൻ സ്റ്റിക്കി നോട്ട്സ് ആൻഡ് യു പുട്ട് ഇറ്റ് ഇൻ ഓൺ എ ബോർഡ്. Then you arrange it based on your priority, and then we will start developing on it. Based on that, we will create the requirements. Then we will create the sprint. That means a short period of time development. അതിനുള്ളിൽ ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നത് ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്യും. അങ്ങനെ it should go. So this is the form of a story card. Then the major characteristics of your story. ഇതിന്റെ യൂസർ സ്റ്റോറിയുടെ മേജർ ക്യാരക്ടറിസ്റ്റിക്സ് ഇതാണ്. ഒന്ന്, ഇറ്റ് ഷുഡ് ബി ഇൻഡിപെൻഡന്റ്. ഓരോന്നും ഇൻഡിപെൻഡന്റ് ആയിരിക്കണം. Then it should be negotiable. That means it should be നിങ്ങൾക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും മാറ്റങ്ങൾ വരുത്താൻ മാറ്റങ്ങൾ വരുത്തണമെന്നുണ്ടെങ്കിൽ അത് മാറ്റാൻ പറ്റണം. Then valuable verticals. Stories must deliver values to stakeholders or business. നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, നമ്മൾ ബെനിഫിറ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞൊരു സംഗതി അവിടെ എഴുതുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ. ബെനിഫിറ്റ് can contain the values. Then estimable. That means you should be able to estimate the user story. എന്ത് estimate ചെയ്യണം? Time required for development. The time required for development should be able to estimate, and it should be small. നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞല്ലോ, any user story should be small in size. If it is complex, you have to divide it into small and make it simple and then write. Then testable. That is what we call it as verifiable. The user story is related description must provide the necessary information to make test development possible. That is, you should have an acceptance criteria or acceptance criteria ഉണ്ടായിരിക്കണം. So to understand easily, we call it as invest. That is independent, negotiable, valuable verticals, estimable, small, and testable. So this is the major characteristics of your user story. The next part is the use cases. Then the case is a methodology used to identify, clarify, analyze the requirements. നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞതാണ്. A use case is a description of the series of interaction between actors. How every actor is interacting with the actions. For example, see, we will represent it like this. This is an actor, and you have a set of actions. That is action 1, action 2, then action 3. Out of which this is actor 1, a particular role. Actor role 1 accessing the action 1 and action 2. Here we have another user. This is actor 2. This actor 2 is accessing action 3 and action 1. So we can understand what is this in this action. So this action can be represented, okay, as an activity or set of activities. That is, the actors can be users or part of the application. The users can use cases has a larger scope than the user story. ശരിയാണ്. Because when we talk about a user story, it should be small എന്ന് നമ്മൾ നേരത്തെ പറഞ്ഞിട്ടുണ്ട്. But you look here, ഇവിടെ small അല്ലല്ലോ. It is a big, we have very large scope in this because there are two actors are there, the different actions are there. പക്ഷെ നിങ്ങൾ മറ്റേതിലേക്ക് പോകുമ്പോഴോ, when we go into the user story, as an admin, as a user, as a customer എന്നാണ് നമ്മൾ പറയുന്നത്. അതിനെന്താ സംഭവിക്കുക? വെരി ലിമിറ്റഡ് സ്കോപ്പ് ആണ് അവിടെ ഉള്ളത്. A simple template might require the use case to have the following fields. So when you are writing a use case, we can have the minimum the following fields. 1, the title, the name of the goal, and the title includes an action, and then the main actor. Then main success scenario, this gives you the acceptance test. This gives you the acceptance test. That is a numbered sequence of steps describing the most normal variation of the scenario. Then extensions, the sequence of steps describing other variations of the scenario. If there is any changes in the scenario, how that can happen. This may include cases such as when the user enters a valid data or the application cannot handle a request, etc. See, when you are trying to suppose നമ്മൾ എക്സെപ്ഷൻസ് എഴുതുന്നത് പോലെ ഉള്ള ഒരു കേസാണ് ഈ പറഞ്ഞിരിക്കുന്നത്. Other templates include lot more fields such as a list of stakeholders interested in the scenario, preconditions, post conditions, success and failure factors, success and failure variations, etc. We can right? In any number of informations required in the use case can be written, but it mandatory it should have these things, that is title, main success scenario, and the extensions. What are the major characteristics of representation of use cases? The use cases describe the functional requirements of the system from the end user perspective. So both the things are representing the or captures the end user requirement. Creates a goal focused sequence. It creates a goal focused sequence of events that is easy for users and developers to follow, because we already told a scene means it is divided into different events. So a programmer can directly go into an event and it can be programmed, then integrate these events, he will get the scenario. A complete use case will include one main or basic flow and various alternative flows. So it gives you the main flow as well as the different alternative possible ways of flows. The alternative flow, also known as extending the use case, describe the normal variation to the basic flow as well as the unusual situation. So that is called an exceptions. സാധാരണ നമ്മൾ പറയുന്ന exceptions കൂടി നമുക്ക് ഇതിൽ include ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. So major characteristics are, it is organizes functional requirements. No explanation needed. Models the goal system actor interactions, right? That is action and actors. Records path called the scenario from events to goals, how your events are executed, and by executing the events how your goal will be satisfied. Describes the main flow of events and various alternate flows. So it gives how this particular thing will be flowing from top to bottom, and if there is anything alternative, that can also be represented. It is in multi-level, it can be represented in multi-level, so that one use case can use functionality in another one. That's what I have just shown above. That is, you have action 1, action 2, and action 3, and actor 1 and actor 2. So actor 1 is acting action 1 and 2. This actor 2 is accessing actor 1 and 3. So it can be in multi-level to represent. Then this is the methodology. Identify all system users and create a profile for each one, system profile. Then select one user and depth their goal, particular user, what are the things the user is doing. Then describe the course taken through the system to reach that goal. So what are the things this particular user is doing? And consider every alternate course of events that extended use cases. So what are the major deviations that can come should be identified. Identify all commonalities in user journeys to create a common course use case. That is, all the users, if they have a common operation in nature, then identify that. Then repeat the steps. This place to this place, 2 to 6. You repeat it for all the other systems. So do it for user 1. First you do it for user 1. Okay, completed at this stage. Okay, you are completed it here. And then take the user 2. Start from here. Because here you have identified the set of users. Now, use case benefits. Developers, by reviewing how a system should behave while also helping the areas in the process. The list of goals created in use case writing processes can be used to establish the complexity and cost of the system. Complexity and costs and complexity and cost കണ്ടുപിടിക്കാൻ പറ്റും. Focusing on both the user and the system, because user is an actor and system is an action. Then real system needs to be identified earlier in the design process. The real-time systems that has to be identified early. Easy to understand by stakeholders, including customers, users, executive, etc. So the main point is easy to understand. Then save time by making it easier to define fine system requirements. That means you can refine the requirements because everything is written very clearly. You have an action specified and actor specified, role is specified, actions are specified. So what happens is you can save time on this. Then avoid scope creep. Scope creep means it is the communication between developers and the stakeholders. So developers can understand in one form. Developers can developers can understand in one form, and the users can understand in another form. So this gap can be filled by using this particular use cases. Then premature design can be avoided, because premature design in the sense, because when you are going for design without knowing what is required, we may design based on the first hand information received. We go for based on the first hand information we may go for a design. Then it should not be done, because focusing on what the system should do rather than how it should do. So our design can be based on what the system should do, because it is very clearly written in the use case. It can be easily transformed into test cases from each of the scenarios, because we have mentioning that why we require it, right? And you have to have a testing conditions to help ensure that all the functional requirements of the systems are included in the test plan, because we have n number of use cases. All the use cases are in the test plan or not can be identified. Can be used in various other areas of development. Project planning, we can use it in project planning, you can use it in documentation, and we can use it in test case definitions. It can also be used as a planning tool for iterative development. Iterative development we have already told, that is then doing it in repetitively, that is called the iterative model. So this is the summary of the things, that is requirement specification. This specification we have already told, and we have told a template. In the template we have defined a very limited scope of things, but here this gives you the total list of things that can be included in your specification. It is not compulsory, it is only for understanding. That is, there are four major categories that we can decide whether we are incorporating it or not. One is project drivers, then project constraints, the non-functional requirements, and the project issues. All these things you can refer in your specification. Validation we have already specified. It's just for once for reminding that is written. That is, uh, are we writing the product? Are we doing the things right? And are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right thing, or are we doing the things right? Then validation comes before verification. So this is a major part. Validation has to be the first thing, and verification is second. Then changing requirements. This is another scenario that we have to look into, because requirements may evolve over time. സോ നമ്മളിങ്ങനെ റിക്വയർമെന്റ്സ് കളക്ട് ചെയ്ത് വരുമ്പോൾ ചിലപ്പോൾ പുതിയ റിക്വയർമെന്റ്സ് വരും. അപ്പം അങ്ങനെ വരുന്ന സമയത്ത് ആസ് വർക്ക് പ്രൊസീഡ്സ് ദാറ്റ് സംതിങ് വുഡ് ബി ഡൺ ഹാർഡ്. നമുക്ക് അന്നേരം എന്തെങ്കിലും ചെയ്യാൻ വളരെ ബുദ്ധിമുട്ടായിരിക്കും. ഓർ മേ stumble across a technique that lets a high value feature with a little extra time. ചിലപ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് ഒരു വലിയ റീവർക്കുകളോ വലിയ വർക്കുകളോ ഇല്ലാതെ ഒരു നല്ല റിക്വയർമെന്റിന് നമുക്ക് അതിൽ കൊടുക്കാൻ പറ്റും. Often changes are driven by customers. ഇത് കസ്റ്റമേഴ്സ് ആണ് ചേഞ്ചസിനെ ഡ്രൈവ് ചെയ്യുന്നത്. After they start to see working pieces of application, they may think other items that they had it thought of before. So when we are looking into, അവർ ചിലപ്പോൾ അവർ വർക്ക് ചെയ്യുമ്പോൾ ആയിരിക്കും അവർ ചിന്തിക്കുന്ന, അയ്യോ ഇതിനെക്കുറിച്ച് നമ്മൾ മുന്നേ ചിന്തിച്ചില്ലല്ലോ, ഇതും കൂടി ഇതിനകത്ത് ആഡ് ചെയ്താൽ എന്താണെന്ന്. Then depending on the kind of project, they may accommodate changes as long as they don't get out of hand. സോ ചേഞ്ചസ് എപ്പോഴും നമ്മൾ ചിന്തിക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് നമ്മൾ എന്ത് ചെയ്യാറില്ല, നമ്മൾ അതിലേക്ക് ആഡ് ചെയ്യാറില്ല. കാരണം ആ പ്രോജക്റ്റ് നമ്മുടെ കൺട്രോളിൽ വിട്ടു പോകുമോ എന്നുള്ള ഒരു സംശയം നമുക്ക് ഉണ്ടാകാറുണ്ട്. സോ വാട്ട് വി വിൽ ഡു ഇസ് വി വിൽ ഗോ ഫോർ എ ചേഞ്ച് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് പ്രോസസ്. We will go for a change management process. എന്താണ് ഈ ചേഞ്ച് മാനേജ്മെന്റ്? സോ വാട്ട് യു ആർ ഡൂയിങ് റൈറ്റ് നൗ ഷുഡ് കണ്ടിന്യൂ, ദെൻ തിങ്ക് ഓഫ് ചേഞ്ച്, ടേക്ക് ദ ചേഞ്ച്. ഇതിന്റെ ഇടയിൽ നമുക്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നതാണെങ്കിൽ we will do it at that time. Then creation of change control board. അപ്പോൾ ഈ change management വരുമ്പോൾ when change management comes into picture, the first thing that is to be thought of is change control board. So this change control board is the people who are managing the changes. Then customers and others can submit change request to this board for approval. So ഇവരിലേക്ക് submit ചെയ്യുക. Then the board decides whether change should be implemented or deferred to a later release. So can we do it right now, or it can be done it on a later stage. The change management process is the place to track changes in the software. അപ്പോൾ നമ്മൾ ഈ പ്രോസസ്സിനെ ട്രാക്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മളുടെ ചേഞ്ചസിനെ ട്രാക്ക് ചെയ്യാൻ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്ന മെക്കാനിസമാണ് ചേഞ്ച് മാനേജ്മെന്റ് പ്രോസസ് എന്ന് പറയും. ദാറ്റ് ഈസ് വാട്ട് ഐ ടോൾഡ് ഇറ്റ് ഹിയർ. On finally, the requirements development process. These are all for your information. In case if it is asked for the examination, you can write it. One is requirements development process. That as a process, how the requirement will be developed. One, develop the requirements. That is gather, analyze. ഒരു specific term നമ്മൾ ഇവിടെ അറിയണം. That is the concept of operation. So whatever you are understanding, studying, everything should be for operation, should be able to execute. Then write and document requirements. So once we collected everything, then write it in a document. Then check its completeness, whether everything has been completed or not. After that, analyze it, refine it, if need be, decompose it into smaller units. For subsystems or small units, or based on your development, you decompose it. Then validate the requirement, and finally manage the requirements. So this is the stages of your requirement development process. This is what we have, requirement engineering. We call it as it in 4 small steps. So this is all about your requirement engineering process, and learn it. And this here ends the first module. So study well and write the exams. Okay, thank you.